Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Oscar prediction video. Now, before we get into this one, I do have a little disclaimer to make, and that is this might be the final nomination prediction video I do, which I know it seems kind of early, but I, sometimes I do one in December, and sometimes I don't. And the tricky thing is, if I were to do it in December, it would be like right before the Golden Globe nominations and the Critics' Choice nominations were announced, which usually starts to throw a bit of a wrench in things. And once you get closer to the ceremony itself, then things are changing on pretty much a daily basis. And if I were to upload a video in that period, then my opinions would change pretty shortly afterwards. But a little bit more on that near the end of the video. But for now, I just want to give an update on where things are in November. And while a couple of things have changed, a lot of things are pretty much the same. At this point, there's only a handful of things that have left to be seen, namely Babylon and Avatar: The Way of Water. But let's just hop right into it. In the category of Best Documentary Feature, I think I've added Senior because that got some really, really strong reviews for that. That's about Robert Downey Jr. and his relationship with his father. And I don't really know how well the others are going to do. I will say Descendant is the first documentary of the year that I have seen. It's on Netflix, and I think it's pretty powerful and could easily get on. But we really never know with this category. All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, which I had in the number one position for a while, that has now moved to the number two slot. And so I don't really know. The reason for that is because even though it was the early perceived frontrunner, it failed to earn a nomination at the Critics' Choice Documentary Awards, which is kind of crazy because there's been sort of a pattern the past couple of years of, the Oscars don't nominate the frontrunner, and whatever wins the Oscar at Critics' Choice counted it to not be nominated at the Oscar. And this year they've thrown even that for a loop because the presumed Oscar frontrunner was not nominated at Critics' Choice. So it really does feel like there's no immediate frontrunner in the race. There's just a couple of documentaries that various people are talking about. So at the moment I have Fire of Love in first place, although it's really hard to tell at this point. In the category of international feature, this is where things get interesting. I still have All Quiet on the Western Front in the number one position, but I have seen a couple people starting to write that movie off. I'm not even entirely sure why. People are doubtful that it can go all the way. Having seen the film, I think it's one of the best things that I've seen this year, and I think it still makes sense as a number one for this category, but I think there's more people are questioning how well it can do outside of that, and I'll certainly get to that. I still have faith in it. And I think everything else is basically the same. I moved a couple of things around. I now have Saint Omar getting in that last slot, because I think that's a little bit more traditionally Beatty than Holy Spider. But I don't really know. It's hard to really say for sure with this category. Animated feature is interesting because Guillermo Del Toro's Pinocchio had just premiered when I did my last Oscar prediction update. And now that more and more reviews have come in, it's certainly the frontrunner to win this category, but there's more and more of a narrative beginning to build that it can really contend in other categories outside of animated feature, and this may be just the beginning of what it can do. More on that later. I have My Father's Dragon ahead of Turning Red, watching My Father's Dragon tonight, looking forward to it. I don't think anything in this category has any real chance of beating Pinocchio, but My Father's Dragon is Cartoon Saloon, and that always gets on. Turning Red, I have started to be a little bit anxious recently about it came out so early, like, is it going to have to fight to stay in the race? And then Strange World is one of the few things that has yet to be seen this year. We're waiting anxiously on reviews for that. Is it going to be a disappointment, or is it going to be more of a contender? And as for Wendell and Wild, I have seen that, and I unfortunately have to agree with the general consensus of great animation. I wish I liked the rest of it. Very all over the place, very jumbled. Uh, a lot of people have asked, could it still get on? I think it could, just because Henry Selick is so respected, and the animation branch almost always goes for stop motion, uh, because stop motion is really hard to do, and the animators have a lot of respect for that. But here's the thing, though: if it doesn't get on, which it might, because there's also another Netflix stop motion film that's going to be more in the conversation, but DreamWorks, they have the bad guys, and initially I thought, oh, bad guys is clearly the number 6, clearly ready to jump in and take a slot if Wendell and Wild has to leave. But now reviews have just come in for Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and that's much better received than a lot of people were anticipating. So I think DreamWorks has a bit of a conundrum on their hand of which movie is going to be their bigger priority in the animated feature race, and there is a danger of the two of them canceling each other out. And outside of that, we do now know that Marcel the Shell is going to be eligible for animated feature, but I don't think it has any real chance of getting nominated because the branch is very, very stingy with what they consider to be real animation, as proven by the fact that they almost said Apollo 10 and a half couldn't be considered for the category. And now that's changed, but I think a lot of voters in that branch just, what's animated, what's not. Actually, the funny thing is, Avatar: The Way of Water, from what I understand, has considerably less live action stuff than the first film, which means I can almost see a world where people try to make the argument that that counts as an animated movie, but I don't think it's going to make it into this category. In the category of Best Sound, I still have Top Gun Maverick in the number 1 slot, I believe, although All Quiet on the Western Front, very, very strong work in that film. And I think the top 5 is mostly the same as I left it, and then not much movement below it either. The funny thing is, Del Toro's Pinocchio, I think, considering how well that has the potential to do in other categories, I'm a little surprised that not a lot of people are talking about it in Best Sound, because it is animated and all sound in animated films have to be invented from scratch. So I could definitely see it picking up a nomination here, although it might, I don't have it in right now, but keep an eye out for that. And I don't think I have that much else to say in this category. Best Original Song, though, this is getting interesting, because this category for a long time looked really weak, and now it's starting to look surprisingly strong. But that's what happens when Rihanna enters the race for Lift Me Up, which if Oscar producers want to guarantee ratings, a Lady Gaga versus Rihanna race, that's going to get people to tune in. Now, when it comes to other contenders, we do know that Pinocchio is going to be a musical, but the producers are going with the tried and true method of only submitting one original song, in this case, Ciao Papa, which apparently is the big emotional moment in the movie, in maybe the same sense as Dos Oruguitas was. So that definitely is going to get on. Not To, I've moved up a little bit because that song really has been making the rounds. More and more people are talking about it, and it makes sense. If you're going to vote for the movie anywhere, it's going to be in song. And then for the 5th slot, this was something I changed at the very last minute. Stand Up from Till. I initially didn't remember the end credit song from this movie that much until I was going over the Hollywood Music Media Award nominations, and it got nominated. And when I look at this movie and the strength of Deadweiler's performance, people are going to be wanting to give it a little bit of extra love somewhere, and this does make sense as the place to award it. But I don't know. It's not the most memorable song in the world, and it is maybe a little bit too upbeat for the movie it's in. So it's not a sure thing, but I think keep an eye out for it. There's definitely a lot of other contenders. Keep Rising, still have my eye on that, but Woman King seems to be slipping from people's memories a little bit, so it'll have to fight to stay in the conversation. This is a Life. People have reminded me that just because it's in a big Best Picture contending film doesn't mean it's automatically going to get on. We saw it with like Coda and Boyhood and stuff like that. So maybe the song just isn't the most memorable and people aren't going to remember it. Applause, I've moved it out just because I think Diane Warren is going to get a Special Achievement Award, and also it's Lady Gaga, so I just, I mean, with Lady Gaga, who has another song this year, I don't know. It's definitely still a part of the conversation. You always have to keep the Diane Warren song in your top 10, but I don't know. And I think New Body Rumor and Nobody Like You don't have the strength they need to get in over some of these other contenders. Best Original Score. Now, I have moved the score for Women Talking in first place because a lot has been said about the power of that score, and it was used in the teaser trailer, and it sounds really good. So, yeah, this does make sense. It does make me a little bit upset in retrospect because if you're going to give Hildur an Oscar for this movie, then you totally could have given Thomas Newman the Oscar for 1917 3 years ago. More on that in a minute. Funnily enough, as I'm putting this stuff together and I'm switched the poster for Pinocchio because I like that poster more, I realized that it's kind of the same poster as The Fabelmans, which I don't know if that's going to have any sort of impact on this race, but just something I want to point out. And Pinocchio, if they really respond to the movie and they want to give it a win somewhere outside of animated feature, this is the easiest place to do it. I could very well see that happening, but I don't. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see how the race shakes out. I think it's definitely going to get nominated. And then I have Babylon and Banshees getting in next. Although, don't underestimate The Woman King, even though the film is failing in other categories, it is still Terence Blanchard, and it is fairly well liked. Now, in the category of Best Visual Effects, Avatar is still winning. Nothing's changed about that. But I have moved around some of the other contenders. I finally put Top Gun Maverick in. The thing is, I was concerned because I'm like, there's really not that much CGI in the movie. It's like all done for real. But apparently, the filmmakers have been vocal about the fact that there is CGI in the movie and a lot more than you would expect. So apparently, I'm gonna imagine that when they put out the like videos showing the VFX real, and that's going to get a lot of people's attention. And the use of practical effects is certainly going to help. So I do now have it getting in. And Del Toro's Pinocchio, oddly enough, is starting to feel safe, considering things like Night Before Christmas and Kubo and the Two Strings did get in. That very much fits the mold. And if the movie is that beloved and clearly as visually stunning as it is, it would definitely make sense as a nominee. And then, okay, I think it's going to be close with that last spot between Wakanda Forever and The Batman. I think The Batman was kind of early in the year, but it also used CGI. It also used the volume in a way that people liked. And Wakanda Forever, I think, is well liked, but the thing that gives me pause about it is there's been all these stories recently about, like, how VFX artists are being treated at Marvel and how they're working under really, really bad conditions. And I could see a situation where it leads to a boycott and they don't want to nominate any Marvel film. With that said, Wakanda Forever is clearly a very, very big film, and I think it could still definitely get on. I don't really think anything below that has much of a chance. I think people are forgetting about Multiverse of Madness, and Black Panther is going to be like the only Marvel film to get recognition. Although, don't entirely count on RRR because people do love that movie, and it might be a convenient way to nominate it somewhere else. In the category of best makeup and hairstyling, I actually don't have that much to say other than I really hope All Quiet on the Western Front gets nominated because there was some really incredible work in that movie. Um, Outside of that, I think we can basically skip this category because there's really just not that much to update on. As for costume design, there is, I think, one thing we should address, and that is Chevalier, which I thought for sure would be a contender. It turns out that's being released next year. So I remember sort of being stumped for a while as to what film was going to get that last slot. And I think most years we get one lone costume design nomination. And I think there's a couple of things that could fit the bill, but I almost said Matilda. I'm ultimately going to lean towards Corsage. I think the fancy dresses in that movie really do make sense as the typical lone costume design nomination, regardless of whether or not it makes it in for international feature, which it still could. Now, as for best production design, oh boy. So this is the category where I'm really going out on a limb by including Pinocchio in my top 5. No animated film has ever gotten nominated for Best Production Design. It's never happened, and there's so many instances where it really should have happened. And I guess some people are like, oh, but they don't actually build sets. In this case, they actually did, because it's stop motion, so they did build sets. It's just all miniature, and you can argue that that's less work, but still, you can't deny when a movie looks incredible. And just going off the trailer, this movie looks incredible. And the fact that Del Toro's name is so heavily associated with the film, I think people might remember, oh, Del Toro's movies always look great, and this is just another one of those. And the Del Toro factor will kind of cause people to overlook the fact that it's an animated film. Now, even if it ends up not getting nominated for a picture or screenplay, this nomination would still make me so happy, and it would be a big step forward in animated films being taken seriously as an art form by the Academy. I don't really have that much more to say other than I've added Glass Onion to the top 10 because based on the trailer there is some interesting contemporary production design that's happening in that film, but I still don't think it's going to contend for like a lot of serious above the line categories like picture or supporting actress. But with that being said, I do want to say in the category of best cinematography, I still have Fabelman's number 1, although having seen All Quiet on the Western Front, that really should be winning the Oscar. I can't imagine like more eye-popping cinematography than that this year. But I don't know. I don't know how well the movie overall is going to perform, somewhat unfortunately. I'll get to that more later. But I have sadly taken Empire of Light out of my top 5, and I have Top Gun Maverick in instead. Empire of Light is interesting because I feel like when it came out, it was getting pretty good reviews, pretty solid reviews. Like, okay, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's good. And then as time went on, more and more people have just stopped talking about it and have started talking about other contenders. And I don't know if like reviews have gotten worse for that or if it just feels worse, but I feel like Empire of Light is just sort of falling off as an awards contender, even though on the surface it's pretty big Oscar bait. I should probably mention too, I do, for the first time in my Oscar predictions, I am finally acknowledging that Bardo is a movie that exists. I have it at number 10 in cinematography because I've heard, even if people don't want to vote for the movie in international feature or anywhere else, the cinematography in the movie is still stunning enough that it could get nominated here. And I will concede that because it's not the huge awards juggernaut that it was predicted to be. Still is a shame that Inarritu has not seemingly not faced any consequences. Sorry, that he has seemingly not faced any consequences for the bad things that he did on set. But whatever, it might get nominated. It might not. I'll concede that it's a possibility. Best film editing is another category where I really just don't have that much to say. I have Banshees at 6. I have Glass Onion at 10. I don't know. I don't know what people are going to want to do, but the top five just makes sense. So it makes sense that this would be my five. Oh, here's what I can say. I moved All Quiet out of the top 10 entirely, even though I initially had it number five. Having seen the film, it's not what I was expecting in terms of editing. There's a lot of long takes. There's not a lot of like fast-paced action scenes, and the Academy tends not to like long takes in this particular category. And now we come to the top eight, the screenplay categories. Now, this top five in adapted screenplay does make a lot of sense to me. A Woman Talking clearly a winner. The Whale and Glass Onion at this point makes sense. She said, now this is interesting because technically, like, this movie has not gotten the best reviews, but it's not gotten panned either. People are giving it like a 7 or 8 out of 10. And I don't think that's going to be enough for it to get in Best Picture, but in a particularly weak adapted screenplay lineup, it does make sense, and people are saying this is going to happen, so I have it at number 4. And then Pinocchio, I will admit it does make sense. There was a point in time when I was thinking maybe this could be just a screenplay nominee and not in for picture, but now, to be perfectly honest, I'm beginning to see a world where it gets nominated for picture but misses screenplay. And that's not what I'm predicting. I think it doesn't need the screenplay nomination to get in for picture, because Nightmare Alley didn't need it either. But it definitely wouldn't hurt, and it would be another big nomination to add to the impressive lineup that Pinocchio is stacking up there. I apologize if my words don't make sense. For some reason, I'm just in a weird headspace right now. I will say, months ago, I had Marcel the Shell in my top 10, and then I took it out, and no one else really had it in there. And now people are starting to put it in their top 10, I guess because it's starting to look really weak. The funny thing is, I could still kind of see it happening. It would be weird. I'm leaning more towards Pinocchio right now because that's also a kid-friendly movie, kind of. It's debatable, but if Marcel can't get nominated for animated feature, and maybe people just want to nominate the movie somewhere, it's out there, but I don't know. The out there nominations tend to happen in original rather than adapted, but with the lineup looking this weak, I guess we can't completely write it out. And speaking of which, Best Original Screenplay. Now, in this category, the top 3 look pretty solid. Everything Everywhere, Banshees, and Fabelmans, I don't see anything knocking that out. And then Babylon at 4, although we still don't know exactly what that movie's going to do. We're waiting for reviews to drop. And then After Sun, I have at number 5. So this is a movie that it's funny, I had it getting in for picture and screenplay for a while, and then I saw like one bad review, and that made me second guess it, and now I'm realizing, oh, like, all movies get like some bad reviews. Like, it's not the be-all end-all that I thought it was, and the vast majority of people seem to really get into this movie, and I think there is this narrative that it could easily be the quote-unquote little indie that could. Now, it's not a sure thing, and if it doesn't get in, then I'd have my eye on Triangle of Sadness, which seems to be this one that everyone's talking about as a potential lone screenplay nominee. Now, I don't know how well it could do. It might be a little too weird and off-putting for some Academy voters, but it could happen. And then Till, I incorrectly put it in adapted at one point, but now it makes sense original, but I don't think it's going to get on given this competition. Moving on to the acting categories. So, oh my god, why did Michelle Williams have to drop out? Because, like, she would have an incredibly easy path to victory. No one else in this lineup comes even close to challenging her. And for the record, she could totally still get nominated. We have to see what the Guilds and Critics Awards do. But as of right now, I have Buckley and Foy at 1 and 2, and I don't necessarily know which of them could win. Chow at 3, Condon at 4, Sue at 5. It all makes sense, and I don't really know what else to say. Sadie Sink, like, keep an eye on that performance, and then, but this is really interesting, Carey Mulligan. From what I understand, I have not seen the film, but from what I understand, Mulligan is definitely co-lead in this film, but the studio is pushing supporting to try and get her nominated. And it could pay off, but I'm actually surprised by, at Next Best Picture, she's actually ranked number 1 most likely to win this category, which feels a little bit off. I don't remember the raves for her performance being that good, but that's the thing. People are just looking for the frontrunner because with Williams out of contention, people just don't know who else to go for. And then I do have Frankie Corio at number 10 because that performance has been singled out a lot, but it has been a while since we got a child performance nominated for an Oscar. Moving on to Best Supporting Actor, it's funny how Ke Huy Quan has just become the frontrunner, and everyone's just like, fine, I guess this is happening now. I think it could definitely happen. Like, the performance has a definite narrative behind it, and people do really respond to that character out of everyone the most in the film. Gleason, from what I understand, that performance is too quiet to really contend here. And then Wissaw and the two Fabelmans boys also makes sense. Now, okay, I don't have Pitt because there's been some controversy there. Keegan, I think, could show up, but it's going to have to be tight. It's going to be tight. It's going to depend on how much that movie is embraced overall. I will say, I have seen Causeway, and Brian Tyree Henry and Jennifer Lawrence are both very, very good. The movie around them is not the best, so I think that the movie's kind of gonna get forgotten as the season goes on, but I could still see a world in which either one of them maintains enough momentum to be a part of the awards conversation, in particular Henry. And then Jeremy Strong is contending. I think people have talked about that performance in particular as one of the highlights of that movie. Eddie Redmayne is interesting because I haven't actually seen the film yet. I think I could very soon, but people have sort of been singling out Redmayne's performance as this is the sort of thing where it makes sense to get the surprise SAG nomination and maybe like a surprise Globe nomination. And we would think maybe this is going to be a thing, and then it doesn't get nominated for Oscar. Kind of weird that people are calling that this early, but I may as well have Redmayne as a part of the conversation for now, and maybe he could subvert expectations and get nominated for the Oscar. Who knows? Now, in the category of Best Actress, I feel like most people have settled on the 5. Deadwyler, Blanchett, Yeoh, Robbie, and Williams. I have moved Deadwyler into my number 1 position. Having seen the film, this definitely would make sense as a winning performance, but there is the question of how well is the movie going to do outside of her. One could argue that the performance is so striking it doesn't matter, and the performance is certainly like the definition of Oscar bait, but if the movie doesn't have a Best Picture nomination, it's going to be hard for her to overcome, especially if so many of the other contenders are in the Best Picture conversation. Blanchett, I know she's getting the best reviews of her career, but people are divided on the film, and they're also divided on the character. The character is not likable, and it's really hard to win a lead acting Oscar for playing an unlikable character. But it could still be Yeoh, and it could still be Robbie. No one's seen that film yet. There's even people suggesting that Michelle Williams' gamble could pay off, and she could overcome the competition and win and lead. I don't know. I think Deadwyler's performance just screams winner, and I think everyone who sees that movie is like, she's winning, right? And I have it at number 1, but it's still not a sure thing, and it's going to be really interesting to see the way this race shakes out. And then 6 through 10 are basically the same 6 through 10, just in a slightly different order. Best Actor. Definitely the weakest category this year, or at least it looks like that. People have pointed out online, oh, there's a bunch of great performances in small movies that people aren't really paying attention to. Um, I will say that's why I'm predicting Paul Mescal to get on for After Sun, because in the absence of a lot of big contenders, Mescal makes sense as something that, like, oh, we didn't have that many options. Let's go for this one. Like, small movie, great movie, people like it. I think it can get in some other categories, so yeah, that makes sense. And then Calva, supposedly the male lead of Babylon, so if the movie's really well respected, then he can get on. And then everyone else, I just don't know. Filling out 6 through 10 was hard. Something about Jeremy Pope in The Inspection makes me think he could be a sneaky contender, even if I don't think the film can do particularly well outside of him. For Best Director, I've decided to keep my top 5 the same, and I have to admit, even as I'm recording this, I'm really not sure about that Edward Berger nomination, but I'm just gonna keep him in for now because I don't really know. McDonough would make sense, but he didn't get nominated for director the last time he had a movie that was up for picture, so I don't really know why that would change this time. Aronofsky, maybe, but the film might be a little bit too minimalist. And then outside of that, I don't really know. And the Academy really does like nominating directors of non-English language films. They've done that a lot recently. So yeah, I have Berger. It makes sense to me. I don't know what to tell you. Um, you know what though? Wells could happen if After Sun is really, really well loved, because they do tend to like directors who get good performances out of child actors. I've noticed that is a thing that does pop up, but not as often as the international slot. And then the top 4 is always going to be the top 4. Okay, Best Picture. Now, I will admit, for some reason, I am starting to be a little bit less confident in my prediction that Everything Everywhere will win Best Picture. I think not as much people are talking about that movie as all the hype is surrounding like the new fall releases and the festival releases. And also people are maybe starting to come out of the woodwork and say like I don't know if Everything Everywhere worked for me, was a little too much for me. Anyone who might be on the autistic spectrum, Everything Everywhere is basically sensory overload the movie. And yet, I, I mean, every movie is going to have some negative thing that people say about it. There is no such thing as a perfect film. And the passion surrounding Everything Everywhere is so intense that I do think it's ultimately going to pay off in the end, but it's not going to be a sure thing. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it does in the critics groups as that gets started this upcoming month. And then the other 4 I think are all solidly in, unless Babylon ends up being really disappointing. I still don't think Fablemans is winning Best Picture. Like this time last year, we all thought that Belfast was going to win Best Picture. Well, not me. I was smart enough to see that that wasn't going to happen. But it's the one that makes sense on paper. It's not going to go the distance. And people want to reward something with a real narrative behind it, and Everything Everywhere, and Women Talking for that matter, both have really strong narratives. The Whale makes sense, Top Gun Maverick makes sense. I have seen people like not be super confident on All Quiet on the Western Front, but I think it's one of the best things I've seen this year so far. And I I mean the Academy just really does like nominating non-English language films recently, and the film is very, very powerful. So I still have it on. After Sun, as I said before, makes sense as the little indie that could slot. And then I have Pinocchio. And I'll be honest, I debated this for a while. I was like, do I really want to do it? Do I really want to pull that trigger? And yet, I'm seeing a lot of other people are saying that this is a legitimate thing. This is honestly gonna happen. And I think there's a lot of signs suggesting that it could happen. I think the best thing that this movie has going for it is that they have Del Toro's name right up front in the title. And Del Toro is so well loved. Nightmare Alley just barely got in a surprise 10th nomination, and that movie was kind of divisive. It wasn't as universally praised as Pinocchio is. Pinocchio is one of the best reviewed movies of the year, and people love Del Toro and people love the passion that he puts into his work. So I really think it's going to happen. But what is astonishing to me is looking at the nominations that I currently have Pinocchio predicted for: picture, screenplay, production design, visual effects, score, song, animated feature. That's 7. If Pinocchio managed to get 7 Oscar nominations, it would be the most that an animated film has ever gotten. It would be the record, because the previous record is 6, set by Beauty and the Beast and WALL-E, and this would be an extraordinary achievement if it were to happen. And that's not even considering sound, which could happen, or even possibly director, though I'm not going to go that far yet. This movie is really, really well loved, and if this actually manages to happen, and I'm not saying it needs to contend to win, but if it can get these nominations, it would be such a major step forward in terms of animated movies being seen as real films with artistic merit that deserve to compete with live action films in Best Picture. I would love for it to happen. It is my most anticipated movie for the rest of the year, and fingers crossed that it happens. I'm rooting for it. But it's not out of the woods yet. There still is some competition, like Tar, which initially I thought the reviews weren't quite so good. I thought it was a little bit too divisive, more of a critics thing. But people are banging the drums for it, and Blanchett is getting the word out about it, so it could happen. She Said is interesting because I'm seeing a lot of people still predict it can get a Best Picture nomination, even though people aren't super high on the film. Like, it's kind of funny because Empire of Light and She Said, both awards Oscar bait type movies, both getting like not the best reviews. It's okay, it's solid, but nothing groundbreaking. But for some reason, She Said is staying in the conversation way more than Empire of Light was. Maybe because She Said is the more quote unquote important movie. I don't know if it could happen, but I don't know. It's possible. The Woman King is sadly kind of fading from memory of a lot of people, even if people really did like it. It's just not staying a part of the conversation. I think it's going to be more part of the conversation than Black Panther now that reviews have come out, and reviews are good, but good for a Marvel film, not good as the first film. So I think it's going to get some tech nominations, but I don't think it's going to be a real contender in picture. Avatar is one of the few things that people haven't seen yet, and I think it could still blow everyone away and get a picture nomination. And then Till could happen if the Deadweiler's performance is strong enough to get it a Best Picture nomination, but there's not too many places outside of Deadweiler and Song where it can really contend, so it's going to be a low nomination count, but it is possible. And okay, so as I wrap this video up, I want to talk about the future. I think I'm going to be able... I could try to get one in by December, but honestly, for all the reasons I said at the beginning of the video, that might be tough. Things are going to be changing on a regular basis, and it's possible that as soon as the video goes up, I'm like, oh, I already regret it. I already am going to want to change it. Now, in the past, I've done Oscar predictions that I've posted on Twitter, although I might post it on a different social media website given the way that Twitter is going. But I post Oscar prediction websites. In the past, I've wanted to make a video on it, but the way I do my Oscar predictions is I do them like on the day before nominations are announced, and I spend the whole day working on that project, and ultimately it's really, really late and time to go to bed by the time I finish them, and I don't have enough time to do a proper prediction video. And in case some of you are asking, well, why don't you just do it a couple days before the Oscars? Because I would be constantly second-guessing myself and constantly wanting to change things. It's best I do it as close as possible to the actual nominations. But this year, I do have an idea. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to finish my Oscar nomination predictions on the day before, like I always do. But then, the day of the nominations, I'm going to do a video where I react to the nominations, discuss my thoughts, and in that video, I'm going to bring up what my predictions were and explain my mindset for predicting certain things and talk about what I got right and what I got wrong. So that is coming. Obviously, it's not coming for a while because the nominations are in February. But just to give you a heads up that that is coming, I'll try to do like some Oscar prediction thing in the middle, or maybe I'll do a Golden Globe nomination predictions. Now that I'm thinking about it, that would make sense. But and maybe I'll squeeze in a Pixels to Pictures, although it's been a while since I've done one of those. Thank you so much for watching this, and I will see you later.